one of our survivors, is very adamant in sharing that these atrocities that happened at residential schools to our Métis survivors, this happened to children, and that is never okay. And we need to do all that we can to protect our children, because those are our future generations. So those were some of the messages that we shared with Pope Francis today. We know that reconciliation is a long journey, and it's going to take commitment and action from so many people. It's going to take action from Canadians. It's going to take action from the government. It's going to take action from churches, parishioners, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, the Catholic Church as a whole, and the Pope. And there's a role to play for everybody in our healing and our reconciliation journey. And so today we extended that invitation to the Pope and to all of you to join us on our path for truth, reconciliation, healing, and justice. And I look forward to the path that we are going to walk when we go home. This is just one step forward in our journey. Reconciliation did not begin today with a meeting with Pope Francis, and it doesn't end here either. This is just one stepping stone on that journey, and we hope that there will be commitment from all of those folks that I just named, including the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. We have talked at length about how we can continue this work in Canada with their leadership alongside of us. We can commit to meetings on a regular basis where we can establish priorities, the priorities that come from our communities, and we can continue to move forward. And out of this, we do hope that there will be concrete action. We hope that the Pope heard our stories, that he acknowledges and truly understands, that he translates those stories from his head to his heart and then into action. So we look forward to the additional response that we will have from Pope Francis on Friday at the general audience, as well as whatever he intends to do when he does come and visit us in Canada. And we know that when he does come to visit us in Canada, that he will know some of those stories from the Métis Nation, and that's exactly what we intended to do today. So we're happy for ourselves. We knew this work had to be done. We've done the work to listen to many of our survivors and deliver that message, and we're here to support one another, and that's exactly what we're doing. So thank you so much to all of you for helping to share our stories. This is really, really important to us, and just really looking forward to seeing how the rest of this week goes.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mitch Case. I'm the Regional Councillor for the Huron-Superior Regional Métis Community on the Provisional Council of the Métis Nation of Ontario, and I'm part of the Métis National Council delegation, one of the delegates that had the meeting with Pope Francis this morning. I guess that I just wanted to provide just a few comments, mostly the how incredibly overwhelmed I am by the amazing strength and resilience of those three survivors. Those three survivors being representative of and emblematic of many more at home. And I cannot say enough about Angie and Anne and Emil and how incredibly I have three new. Never mind Marvel and their universe. Those superheroes are right there in that room this morning who stood up and told the truth, and they told hard truths, and they did it with kindness, and they did it with love, and they did it with respect. But they told the truth, and I think that I just cannot say enough about how amazingly inspiring those survivors are. But I would then say, in many ways, the opportunity for those three survivors to speak this morning, unfortunately, has been in many ways the first time any Métis survivors have been invited to say anything. The exclusion of Métis schools from the settlement agreement a decade ago, the exclusion of Métis survivors and Métis schools from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, has done nothing other than re-victimize and re-traumatize people to have officially essentially officially be told that what happened at one school was wrong. But if it happened at another school and at the end of the day some other government paid for it, well then it was okay. And I don't agree. I do not agree it was okay. What happened was a crime against humanity, and it happened to our survivors, it happened to our children. And that is, quite frankly, the unfinished business that is happening. You know, there is a whole lot of unfinished business that we as Métis people and Métis communities have with Canadian society. And I think today was an opportunity for those three survivors to bring their story forward, not only to Pope Francis but to the world. And I want to commend the media here for paying attention to the Métis Nation in a way that quite frankly, most often doesn't happen. And I commend you for that. I would close by saying, you know, we are committed to, you know, as elected leadership. The one thing we can all agree on, and anyone who knows any elected official in any government in any part of the world, there are very few things we all agree on, but there is one thing we agree on, is that we stand behind those survivors 100%. And we'll do whatever we can to get justice for them. And so my message today would be that we are going to, today is simply the beginning of something. But I would close my comments with a message to the Canadian media and to the Canadian government, that to the Canadian and the provincial governments who operated those Métis schools, that process was largely, I mean, let's be real. Those residential schools were set up to remove us from the land so that Canada could claim everything. And here we are, a century and a half later, with still no process. No process for our survivors to tell their story. No process for anyone to say sorry. No process for anyone to say what happened was wrong. And at the end of the day, Canada still has all the land, and there's not even a process for us to talk to them about it. And that is, quite frankly, unacceptable. And so I would say, I have read journals of priests in the 1800s as they stood there and watched speculators steal land from Métis people all across Western Canada. I know the role that the priests played in the theft of my community's lands in Sault Ste. Marie. I would call on the Catholic Church to stand with us today as we seek justice for all of those other issues that were enabled and facilitated because of residential schools. So I'll leave it there, and I thank President Karen for this opportunity this afternoon.
Français, Kashun, Pixie Wells, Ace Wells. So what I've said to you is, hello, my name is Pixie Wells, and Ace Wells in the language and where I come from. I just want to acknowledge the traditional unceded territories that I reside on. I live in a town called Abbotsford, and the traditional unceded territory there is owned by the Samath and Mattaquay people, and I want to acknowledge that. And I am also the president of the Fraser Valley Métis Association. I come here today holding up survivors, but I also come here today with a voice of the lost children and the children that have been lost. And the survivors today gave me such a warm feeling and understanding that their stories and where they came from and how we got here and why we're in this room today. And why we're in this room today is because of those specific survivors and those ones that told their stories, and not just those three. There's many, many more. There's more stories and more stories. However, those stories are never to be forgotten. They are what we should prove or live to never let happen again, and also allow the voices of the lost children, the children that never got to be or never got to know their culture, because that's where I sit. At 40 years old, I learned that I was Métis. So I am still trying to figure out where I sit in this world, how I fit into this world, and what piece of it that I can bring forward. And the piece that I bring forward is holding those survivors and taking their stories with me. And also when I met the Pope today, and looking at tomorrow, and looking at what we could create together, and bringing back the voice of all children, the Two-Spirit, the LGBTQIA+. As I sit here, that voice has been lost for a very, very long time. And that is why I dressed the way I did today, is to show that the Two-Spirited people are still here, and we've been discommunicated from a lot of our communities and shunned and pushed aside. And not from survivors, just from the atrocities that happened. So I ask that all of you take a really good hard look around and make sure that we're holding each and every one of us accountable to truth and reconciliation. We have to have truth first before we can have reconciliation, and we need action. And what is the action? Each and every one of us in this room can play some part in that action. And I'm not saying that we all have to, but I think that a lot of us need to. And whatever that action is, find something in your community to do. Because I can tell you, when I leave here today, my job just started. My work just started for my people. Because when I go home, I'm going to be asking and I'm going to be looking not just at the government, not just at the Métis Nation BC, but also holding my hand out and going to the churches and asking, how do we move forward in a good way? How can we walk together? We gave the Pope, I should say Mitch, gave the Pope some beautiful, beautiful moccasins for us to all walk together with. And I believe that we can all walk together in a good way, but we all have to hold each other up. So from my voice to your voice, from my heart to your heart, it's one heart, one mind, nothing about us without us. Hi, Miigwech, merci, and thank you all for listening.
You've already heard some very powerful Métis voices, and I would start by saying what a privilege it is as bishops to be able to walk with our Métis people and to be a part of the delegation and the visit with Pope Francis this morning. It was a very beautiful experience and very much a privilege to be there. Years of work have led up to this delegation, these meetings, and today we took a very big step. It's a significant moment, but as other speakers have mentioned, it's also a beginning of new possibilities in terms of walking together. What we wanted to create, what we heard from all three Indigenous groups, was the desire for people to be able to speak to the Pope directly, to tell their stories, to speak of their experiences, of their suffering, and in a particular way, the experiences at residential schools. And for him to be able to hear that and then respond from the heart. So from the Pope's perspective, today was principally about listening, and I think we had the experience of him listening very deeply and engaging on a very personal level with what he heard. It was a beautiful thing that the gathering started with a Métis prayer, prayed by Elder Janvier in the language of Dene Michif. And for us to be together, church leaders and Métis peoples, and to have a Métis lead the prayer, Métis elder lead the prayer in his own language, was a beautiful, beautiful moment. To hear the testimonies of the survivors, and to hear the eloquent leadership coming from President Caron, was a very impactful, powerful morning. A lot of hard truths were spoken, but they were spoken in a very gracious and in a very poignant and in a very powerful way. As the other speakers have said, there was an invitation extended, and there's such a strong desire to accept that invitation, to walk together, to find a way to walk together in a good way, to really embrace that saying, Pixie's just said that I quote often, nothing about us without us. We've heard that over and over again from our Indigenous peoples. It's a day when we want to say we desire to stand with you in your pursuit of justice. We desire to be in solidarity with you on this journey, and we're so grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
I am the French part of the meal. So I want to thank very much all the delegates. Je veux remercier tous les délégués parce que c'est un grand déplacement et je voudrais surtout, moi, à la fin de ces échanges, essayer de communiquer avec vous. I want to try to communicate with you the climate of this meeting that we had this morning, especially with the group of the Métis. Oui, les trois témoignages qui ont été proposés et que nous avons entendus avec le Saint-Père ont été des témoignages du cœur à cœur. Et ils ont été faits dans un climat, je dirais, j'oserais dire, c'est mes lunettes à moi, d'affection mutuelle. Et c'est assez difficile à décrire. Ils ont été faits avec beaucoup de temps, ils ont été faits avec des pauses, et ils ont été faits avec des gestes aussi. J'ai en mémoire les gestes du Saint-Père, qui accueillait ces témoignages, mais qui a aussi pris le temps d'accueillir avec des gestes les délégués, les témoins qui nous ont été offerts. Et cette démarche que nous faisons, simplement pour avoir la note juste de nos rencontres ces jours-ci, et donc celle avec les Métis ce matin, c'est vraiment ce temps qui nous est donné, non pas au niveau des principes, on n'a pas réglé des grandes affaires, on n'a pas signé des accords, on n'a pas fait ça, on a été cœur à cœur sur des expériences, et ceci a ouvert la porte, une porte grande ouverte. Et je pense que je peux dire que c'est du côté des Métis, comme du côté du Saint-Père, c'était évident, une grande porte ouverte à pouvoir s'accueillir et se pardonner, demander le pardon. Alors je pense que je peux dire ça, et j'espère que nous savons que cette rencontre-là n'est pas un point final, au contraire, elle est une étape, elle est une étape dans notre marche ensemble, mais elle est en même temps, moi c'est ce que j'ai vu ce matin, un regard vers aujourd'hui et demain. Oui, il faut prendre conscience du passé. Oui, il faut en tenir compte. Oui, il faut le reconnaître. Il faut s'en rendre responsable. Mais il faut le faire pour aujourd'hui et pour demain. Pour faire quelque chose de bien meilleur ensemble. Et c'est l'expression que le Saint-Père a voulu utiliser lui-même à la fin de la rencontre en disant « I'll take these reflections in my prayer and also in my meditation to be able with you to deliver a message in the 1st of April when it will be the public audience. » Alors, merci beaucoup.
Merci, and thank you everyone for sharing your very personal remarks. We have a brief period of questions, question period available. Erica has the mic here, so if you do have a question, we ask you to put up your hand. We'll try to get to as many as possible. We will just limit it to one question, just in the interest of time to try to get to as many people as possible. Please identify your media outlet and who you're directing your question to when you ask it. So I think we had a hand right over here. Erica, second row here.
Yes. The microphone, is it working?
Yep.
Hi, I'm Eric Regularly with the Globe and Mail. This is a question for anyone who feels like answering it, please. Obviously, you'd like an apology from the Pope. My sense is preferably in Canada than in Rome, but all apologies are not created equal. What I'd like to know is what specifically would you like the Pope to say in his apology? Thank you.
So, based on a number of conversations that I've been extremely fortunate to have with Métis residential schools survivors from across the Métis homeland, you're absolutely right. An apology will be different and it will mean different things to many different people, and many people are looking for something different in that apology. What I've heard though is if you look at the definition of an apology in the dictionary, it talks about an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And I think that's exactly what a lot of our survivors have told me, is that they're looking for that acknowledgement that they played, the Catholic Church, residential schools, played a role in the wrongdoing that was done to these children and to our communities. We know that intergenerational trauma is embedded in our DNA. Scientifically, the science has been done. It shows that we're passing this trauma on to generation, and that we need to start to heal. And so to acknowledge that the Catholic Church is accountable and responsible for some of that harm to not only our survivors who are still living today, but that they're responsible for the harms that our communities still suffer today. That will play an important role in our healing. Will that give us closure? No. An apology is just words, and we then need action to follow that. And part of those actions I've spoken about, in that we need action within truth, reconciliation, justice, and healing. And for truth, part of that will be providing unfettered access to church and residential school records so that we're able to piece together our history in a better way, to know where our families were when their children were taken from them, and where those children went to, and which children didn't return home. We don't have access to all of those stories because those are protected within church records. So we want unfettered access to those records. We also want access to our cultural artifacts that are held here in Rome and at the Vatican. Those artifacts tell a story about our communities. Those are our history. In reconciliation, we talked about an apology and that acknowledgement. We've heard from our survivors that many of them need that to move forward. In justice, some of those actions that we would be looking for is a commitment from the Catholic Church not to shield alleged perpetrators who still live, regardless of their age. We know that perpetrators are still out there. Those who committed these crimes against our children are still living, and we need a commitment from the Catholic Church to not shield those alleged perpetrators. That's important. That's an action we're looking for. For healing, we need, as my colleague Mitch said, substantive and direct compensation for our survivors, many of whom live in poverty today. This has contributed to the systemic inequities that our people face today. Those of our families who don't have a house, a roof over their head. And we need funding for community-based healing initiatives, as directed by our survivors and our families, to heal in the ways that we direct for ourselves. So of course an apology is really important, and we need that acknowledgement, but we also seek action. And these are just a few of those examples that we're looking for.
I want to add just one also. I think that there's an important clarification and a distinction that needs to happen. There are I say it all the time. Everything is always more complicated than we think that it is. But if I were to answer your question, which is what I'm going to pretend to do right now, what an apology to me would have to look like in order for it to be meaningful. There needs to be sort of a multitude of things in there. And there are two different parts to it in my mind. There is what are quite frankly horrific, absolutely horrific crimes that were committed. Physical, mental, and sexual abuse against children. That is absolutely revolting. That should disgust anyone who has looked at what happened. And that is one of the issues. But had those things not gone on, that wouldn't have made residential schools okay. The idea, had children not been physically, mentally, and sexually abused, it wouldn't have meant that the attempted destruction of our culture and the erasure of our people from the earth would have been okay. The entire underpinning of the system, and I don't care about, well, times have changed. There were people then who knew it was wrong. They spoke up and they were fired. So those are the two really important things, and neither one of them is more important than the other. Those crimes against those children have to be treated as such, and there should be an accountability, atonement, apology. I want a thesaurus of all the words that could be used there. But also, had those things never occurred, it still would have been wrong.
Okay, second row right over here.
Phil Palella from the Reuters here in Rome, Bishop Boland, a long time ago. I'd like to ask you, Bishop, perhaps the other bishop as well, but one of the two, a lot has been said about the records, access to the records, as Cassidy just said. Apart from the records of religious orders that ran the schools, and apart from perhaps what is in Canada at the Bishops' Conference, there has been talk that there are records here in the Vatican. Where would they be? Would they be in Brooklyn, the Fides, EDF, or where would they be?
We asked the question. On a demandé la question ici au Vatican en préparant la délégation. C'est la réponse. Il n'y a pas de dossier ici à Rome à propos des écoles résidentielles. Je pense que ça peut se comprendre. Vous savez, l'Église universelle, c'est à travers le monde entier. Alors, des institutions, des écoles, il y en a dans le monde entier. Alors, toutes ces institutions-là n'envoient pas des dossiers à Rome. Alors, les dossiers sont principalement dans les mains des communautés religieuses qui ont tenu les écoles, peut-être aussi le gouvernement qui était le propriétaire des écoles. Quant à notre travail, nous avons commencé à vouloir ouvrir ces dossiers-là et nous savons que du côté diocésain, les diocèses de l'Église, sont surtout des dossiers qu'on appelle sacramentels, c'est-à-dire les sacrements que les enfants ont vécus dans les écoles. Il n'y a pas nécessairement beaucoup autre chose. Maintenant, il y a un travail qui se fait présentement et nous sommes en lien avec les communautés religieuses pour ouvrir le plus possible ce qu'il y aurait comme dossier et pouvoir le partager, je dirais, dans le respect aussi de ce qu'on appelle les lois existantes au niveau de la vie privée. On ne peut pas divulguer tout n'importe comment, n'importe quand, n'importe qui comme ça. Mais je pense que le travail se fait.
I'm not going to translate, I'm just going to add to it. It would be religious communities that might have records here in Rome, not the Vatican. And for instance, the Oblates have indicated their strong desire to be of assistance in whatever way they can. I think requests for records come in multiple ways, and some of them have been referred to not only in responding to individual requests for any information we would have that would communicate something of students who were at a particular school, but also the desire of Métis communities to tell their story. So everything that we would have that would assist in telling that story would be a helpful thing to contribute. So, I mean, I think this is, there is a profound desire to assist in whatever way we can in this regard. And it's conversations that need to happen with particular religious communities or dioceses or any places where any pertinent records might be held. That's right. Right. Yeah. I understand where there might be records, yes.
Hello, Lisa Laflamme from CTV National News. This question also for the bishop, either bishop. I think as recently as September, it was a promise of $30 million to help in the funding projects that are for reconciliation for the survivors, as Cassidy and Mitch mentioned. And I just wonder, as recently as December, there was not a penny seen. So where are we at on that front as far as the finances in that effort? As you say, it is a pledge to give the communities the money they need for these programs. And also a little more clarification, if we could, on the question of these documents. It's 2022. I mean, somebody knows where the documents are, and it seems strange to me that we're just learning today that none of them are in the Vatican archives. I still don't really understand. Who's got the answer to that question?
Alors, il y a deux questions. Pour les dossiers, la réponse au Vatican, il n'y a pas aux archives de dossiers à propos des écoles résidentielles. Maintenant, nous savons où sont des dossiers, je l'ai dit, dans les communautés religieuses qui ont œuvré dans les écoles. Maintenant, on sait très bien que de nos jours et depuis quelques années, notre sensibilité est beaucoup plus grande sur la question. Alors, il y a eu des années où il n'y a pas eu de sensibilité sur la question au niveau de l'opinion publique. Alors, ces dossiers-là, ils étaient peut-être pas beaucoup considérés. Ils le sont davantage. Pour ce qui est du fonds de 30 millions, nous avons voulu faire une structure totalement transparente et indépendante de la conférence des évêques et des diocèses en un sens, afin que le 30 millions soit vraiment là, disponible, avec cette structure, pour être disponible pour des projets. Il y a présentement, au moment où nous parlons, une structure qui est en train d'être mise en place, une corporation. Il y a présentement des directeurs et des administrateurs qui ont été choisis. Dans les directeurs, et ce sont des personnes qui proviennent du milieu autochtone et qui ont une bonne expérience au niveau des affaires, au niveau de la gestion des affaires, de la finance. Et il y a aussi des administrateurs destinés, eux, à nommer, à trouver d'autres administrateurs. Alors, c'est une structure indépendante. Le 30 millions, c'est vraiment un commitment des diocèses. Certains diocèses le font à partir de leur avoir, d'autres le font à partir d'une mise en commun des dons de fidèles qui désirent le faire. Mais nous avons fait notre calcul et nous avons cette somme, et même peut-être un petit peu plus. Mais ça nous prend du temps parce qu'on ne veut pas répéter l'erreur qu'il y a eu lors du premier agreement. On veut vraiment avoir une structure transparente qui va pouvoir rendre des comptes et dont les projets qui seront acceptés le seront d'un commun accord, particulièrement avec les communautés autochtones.
So I would add that dioceses across the country and eparchies have committed, indicated what their commitment is to that 30 million so that it will be achieved. I can say that in Regina we've had several initiatives already. So we had an internet, a place to make internet donations. We had a pew collection. We have a capital campaign underway where we approached every contributor to the capital campaign asking if they would allocate part of that funding instead to this Truth and Reconciliation Fund. We have other funds that we've allocated that way. So we have already designated and have over $1.5 million. So I think that's happening in different dioceses, and we will fulfill that commitment. It's moving forward, and we're working with First Nation and Métis people in our area, for instance, in determining survivor-led initiatives, so that we're building relationships at the same time as we're proceeding in this regard.
Thank you, and I'm going to be following up with Bishop Poisson to get the translation of these answers afterwards about where the records are, because I don't speak French, unfortunately. I do just want to say, I know the initiatives that the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops is undertaking, and they've launched the fundraiser to support reconciliation actions, but I do need to say that the parishioners in the diocese who themselves are individually donating to, that's an act of reconciliation for those individuals, and there's a much larger role for the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops to play in helping us advocate to the Pope and to the Vatican, one of the wealthiest states in this world. There should be no question why these funds have not been paid to our people yet.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Mr. Weiner.
Yes. Bonjour. My name is Christine. I'm from Quebec, and I'm here to cover the story in my language, in Cree, so I report back to my people. So for the Métis delegation, my honor to you, and my question is in terms of the funding that comes in, for residential school and also for the future generation. We've run into problems requesting for that funding, applying for the funding, the Indian Day School, the 60s school. So we run into problems telling us that we're not eligible. We're not eligible for that funding. I don't understand. It's understandable. I don't understand that. And the people that do get approved, they're dictated on how they can spend that money. We say we want to do it for our healing. We invest in our own because I'm happy that we're doing that. And this is the same thing for you guys, the Métis. Do you run into that issue too as well, where you're being rejected, your applications are being rejected, or it's not coming in? They ask all kinds of questions. They need proof. Some of these proofs are long gone, and we don't have access to them. Is that what you're running to as well for the Métis? You guys?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and I'll say there is nothing I love more than a microphone and an audience. So let me say, one of the things, and to Lisa's question also, from a Métis perspective, one of the things that we encounter all the time is there are these huge announcements of funds, and then if you read the little text underneath, Métis are included, and so. The bishops, if we start hearing that Métis aren't included in that, you're going to hear from me. So, let's avoid that. Let's get this right from the start. But one of the other comments that I would make to that question is what has been said by much smarter people than I. The invention of the reconciliation industry in Canada, where our people continue to live in poverty, our people continue to live without, our people, continue to, we sell Indian tacos at our community centers to try to pay for basic needs of people, and yet every university in this country has received, back home, they've received countless dollars for their reconciliation. And all of that, sort of repurposing those dollars back into funding what are, quite frankly, sometimes failing institutions. And that reconciliation industry, we gotta stop that right now. And we've got to put those resources into communities, into the hands of communities, into the hands of community-driven, community-led, and survivor-led work. And anything other than that is quite frankly unacceptable.
I first and foremost just want to thank you for being here and for telling this story in one of our Indigenous languages. Many of our Métis people speak Cree, so I thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and thank you for being the last one to ask a question. On that piece as well, one of the asks that we will be putting forward to the Holy Father is for the establishment of a Métis Reconciliation Trust Fund to fund Métis-specific truth, reconciliation, justice, and healing initiatives that is directed by Métis people, because this is one of the challenges that we have come across. I want to close by sharing some reflections. And this comes from, again, spending countless hours with residential school survivors over the past few months. Residential schools And when we talk about residential schools within a Métis context, it also includes boarding schools, day schools, industrial schools, convents, all which sought to take love away from our people. It took children out of their homes and deprived them of love. It taught them that they were not to love who they are as Métis people. Our children came home hating who they were, hating their language, hating their culture, hating their tradition. They had no love. But our survivors are so resilient, and they're learning to love. And that's one of the things that our survivors tell us all the time. And it's so important to stand up here today and to tell you that we are still here. We still have our culture. Though we still have a lot of work to do in the revitalization of our language, we are doing that work. We love who we are. We love our history. We love our culture. We love our language. We love our people. And we are still here, and we will continue to fight so that our future generations love themselves too. So thank you so much, everyone.
I want to add to that, and partly one of my sisters who texted me, my nieces and nephews are watching at home. And I just, for Thomas and Zig, I'll say at home, I see how proud they are of who they are, as these little indigenous kids who are learning their language. And my niece and my nephew, they can count in language. And I just think about the way that so many of our grandparents never got that opportunity. And the way my grandpa, when I was a kid, he taught me how to count to 5 in Ojibwe, but that was literally all his grandmother taught him, because she refused to teach them the language. She wouldn't teach them. That's all they got, 1 to 5. And I just think about those kids and that, those kids that had these horrible things done to them. But trying as best as I'm always encouraged by our national president to be positive and to be hopeful and to be kind. When quite frankly, I want to get really mad, quite frankly. But she calls us to be better than that. And I think about not just those kids who suffered, but those kids who are coming. And our support over here, her little kids are watching us from home. And that's what really, all of the, with all due respect, the pomp and circumstance of all of this, that's what this is all about, is those little kids. And so when we go home, that's what we're going to work for. We're going to work to make the world a little bit better for all those little Métis kids at home. And I guess I would just ask others to help us with that. Thank you.
Final word from Dixie.
I'd just like to say one last thing. I'm not sure if any of you know the song or have heard of Andrea Menard, but she sings a song called Misikatoanak, and what that means is, the roots coming up after a fire has gone through. So today we sit here and hopefully we're bringing new roots to our children and to the generations coming after us and for our survivors. So Misikatoanak, and I also like to ask you all, and I know this is a small portion and a small point. The Métis rose or Métis flower is called the forget-me-not. So when you go home and you plant something in your garden this year, please plant a forget-me-not. And every time you look at that, remember the Métis people, because that's who we are. Do not forget us. Forget-me-not. Merci, Big Witch.
President Grand, Mitch, Pixie, Archbishop Boland, Monsignor Poisson, thank you everyone for being here. You'll have a chance throughout the week if you'd like to set up time to talk to any of the delegates or the bishops. I know that they've made themselves quite available. We will have our next briefing, maybe a little bit after 4 o'clock. We'll just have the Inuit representatives that will be part of that briefing, but feel free to stay if you are here. And again, we thank the Métis delegates for sharing their stories with us today. Thank you, everyone.
plugged in, right?
Che sono quelli che ne hanno parlato stamattina a italiano, giusto?
It's starting again. Oh.
A bolla Massimo, facciamo bolla.
In realtà c'è stato scritto se allora scegli o qua c'è il cartellone sopra.
Cartellone sopra. Serve il cartellone sopra.
Ma io sto in bolla pure lì. Non può niente. Se io ti faccio un righe sopra sto in bolla. Perché se l'abbiamo fatta prima.
Nel senso, lascia il cartellone dritto.
Ed era il cartellone dritto pure righe. Questa prima non l'ho fatta 10 volte.
Da lì se stai largo si vede storto.
Se stai là.
Aspetta, resta largo.
Ma non devi storta uguale.
Ma niente, ma lascia storta, tanto non si capisce. Se il cartellone è dritto non si capisce che è storto. Vai largo, mettiti largo.
Mettimi l'uovo adesso. Poi mi chiedono di consumare dell'80i a 50.
Adesso vogliono 1080.
Sì, dell'80i a 50.
Un attimo, basta che cambia lui.
Siamo su. Resti su. Ha detto adesso, per quanto? 10 minuti. Ha detto. Poco dopo le 4. 4 le 4. Poco dopo le 4. Ah no, sì. Siamo a buttare sei via al secondo. Ti seguo.
Flag in orange for the next preview.
Faceva basket, questi menavano come i papuri. Io ho tutto quell'idea. Allora hanno detto poco fa che stanno un qualche minuto in ritardo ma stanno per cominciare. Hanno detto guarda avanti, perché facevano delle persone che devono parlare, sono troppo scesi. Quindi pochi minuti in ritardo, perché gli stanno a fare un'intervista uno da un'altra parte. Però capace che all'improvviso scendono, perché devono rispettare la bella. Guarda, io l'avevo lasciata aperta, si sono incazzati a morte, almeno facciamo cambiare un po' la... A me me lo dici, io sono d'accordo. Se vengono, non so il motivo. No, nel senso che attacca lo ciuccio, lo vuole lo ciuccio, non vuole capisci in questo caso. O come dicono un paese per noi il cecco.
Two-minute warning.
Io per favore prima guarda, che sta qua apposta, spero che la cogli. No, la sentita quella di prima che mi serviva, non è stata una figura, Sit down, please.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us. Special welcome to everyone who's in the room with us in Rome, as well as those who are joining us through the live stream. Good to have you with us for our briefing, where we'll be talking about the Inuit delegation that met with Pope Francis earlier today. And we'll follow a similar process for our previous briefing with the Métis delegation, where we'll have some brief remarks from each of our guests on the stage, and then we will have a brief period of Q&A. So to introduce the speakers that you'll be hearing from this afternoon, first we have President Eitan Obed, who is the president of the Inuit Spirit Kanasami. Next to President Obed is Martha Gregg, who's a member of the Inuit delegation. Next to Martha, we have Archbishop Richard Gagnon, who's the Archbishop of Winnipeg, and briefly introduced the delegation this morning. And next to Archbishop Gagnon, we have Bishop William McGrattan, who is the Vice President of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. Welcome to all our speakers, and with that, I'll hand things over to President McGregor.
Thank you. We had our hour-long encounter with the Pope this morning at 11 a.m. We have a delegation of 8 that went to the palace to have our conversation or our encounter. For Inuit, we had 2 parts of the delegation. One was the part that I was convening, which was on behalf of Canadian Inuit leadership. And there were a number of positions that Canadian Inuit wanted me to bring forward today on behalf of land regions and on behalf of Inuit leadership. And then there were a number of individuals who came with their own perspectives and wanted to convey their own personal messages from their Inuit communities to the Pope. So we had a diversity of conversation. The Pope was welcoming and very thoughtful and very engaged throughout the entire encounter, and we were very pleased with the way in which the meeting unfolded. In relation to the content of the meeting, there were a number of conversations about faith and about the ongoing presence of the Catholic Church in Inuit Nunagat. There was a lot of conversation about residential schools and the negative impacts of residential schools on Inuit and the intergenerational trauma aspect of residential schools. There were also positive conversations about the role that the Catholic Church can play in reconciliation and also in Inuit communities moving forward. For the national Inuit positions, there really were three primary concerns that we brought forward. The first was in relation to an apology, and we invited the Pope to Inuit Nunagat as a part of the larger call to action 58 from the TRC, which calls for the Pope to come to Canada to apologize to Indigenous peoples in relation to the role that the Catholic Church played in residential schools. The Pope was kind enough to say how much he wished that will come to pass. We look forward to further conversations with the Catholic Church about whether or not that is an opportunity in the near future. We then also talked about the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement from 2006 and the outstanding concerns that you have about the Catholic Church's implementation of that particular settlement agreement and the gap in compliance on certain issues by the Catholic Church, especially considering the outstanding $25 million restitution, which only $3 million has been paid. We recognize that the Catholic Church has a fundraising campaign in relation to this particular part of the residential school settlement agreement, but we would like to see more immediate action. We also, in relation to TRC and in relation to the ongoing work on reconciliation, asked that the Catholic Church work with us in partnership on the emerging challenge, the heartbreaking challenge of Indigenous children that are being found on residential school properties in unmarked graves. And this was not necessarily in relation to one thing. It's not just records. It's not just compliance to TRC or to the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. It's also the good faith to use the Catholic Church's resources to help in any way that they can possibly help to ensure that we find closure, we find I guess the shared path forward, which recognizes the gross human rights abuses that have taken place, but also the way in which we can move beyond that moment and work together in partnership, but not just through legal binding agreements. The final point that we raised was in relation to the legacy of sexual abuse in the church, and asked the Pope directly if he would intervene in a particular case against Johannes Revoir, who currently resides in France. And we asked that the Pope speak with Father Revoir directly and ask him to go to Canada to face the charges that he is up on in Canada. And if Father Revoir is not agreeable to that, if the Pope would do all that he could to work with the French government to ensure that either extradition can happen or that Father Revoir can be tried in France. We want this new relationship in this relationship of reconciliation to be based on action and also based on mutual shared ambition. And it is such a heartbreaking reality that some people who should have been brought to justice decades ago have not seen justice, and those who have been abused, and those victims, have sometimes died before they have seen justice. What happened in residential school, as far as the policies surrounding residential school are history. A lot of what has happened in residential school happened with people who are no longer alive. But that is not always the case, and there are still things that we can do together to ensure that there is justice for those who do not have it yet. With all those heavy things, there was also a true sense of openness and kindness that was showed to us as a delegation. And so I do want to thank the Catholic Church and the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops for getting us to this point and this day, and also thank the Pope himself for his warm welcome here in Vatican City.
Martha, did you want to offer some reflections?
Hi, my name is Martha Gregg. I'm from northern Quebec, grew up in northern Quebec. I'm also a former residential school survivor. And I'm very humbled and honored to have been chosen to be a delegate / health support. So it's very humbling. What I told the Pope is that there is need for people to heal, and there has to be a point of forgiveness from both parties. Because if you don't forgive, it eats at you, and though you don't forget, there has to be a clean, a healing movement along with the people and the Catholic people, the churches. So that's something that is really needed, to work hand in hand, so that our people can rise from all the hurts that's been done to them. So that is something that we working together, and have respect for one another through love, and have a lot of faith prayers going towards this. Is something that I told him, and I also invited him to come to Canada, because I think it's very appropriate if he do come. It would mean more to the former residential school students and the families, because it's also the intergenerational that are affected by the residential school. So that's something that would be really meaningful for him to do an apology. So hopefully that will happen. But I was just more humbled in this, so I will have a lot of sharing with my people when I get back home. Thank you.
Thank you. The meeting we had this morning was very, use the word intimate. I think that might be a good word to use. It was a listening session, if you will. The point was a private encounter with the Holy Father, and the whole atmosphere was one of listening to what was said. And the Holy Father paid close attention. to what President Obed addressed to him, as well as the various members of the delegation. We entered the room, he greeted each one personally at the door, like you would if someone was coming into your home, so to speak. And then we sat down in a semicircle, and we had a spiritual beginning. And then we had the various statements that were made. It was very calm. Sometimes an atmosphere of calmness and even silence can be very positive too, you know, and I think that there was that kind of attentiveness that was there. It was friendly and openness. And the Holy Father spoke a little bit to those who came. And so we had hoped when the delegation was organized, as you know, it goes back 3 years now, that this would be the tenor of the meeting, that it would be a listening time, an important step to other things, and also to if you will, to establish a relationship in some way of engaging the Holy See in this great Canadian challenge and project of reconciliation in the country. And so the bishops were positive about it, what occurred, and very grateful for the graciousness and the honesty of the delegates who so respectfully but honestly stated what they felt was important to say. And the Holy Father appreciated that. So it was sincere, the meeting. Very unique. One could not help but feel that one was in a, I guess you might call it even in a sort of a historical moment. So it was a great privilege to be part of that. And so it is a step, a listening step, that this whole encounter was this morning. So, thank you.
Having had the privilege to be present, both with the Métis and with the Inuit, I can say that there's a sense of gratitude for their openness to accept the invitation. That we've been working with them for so many years to provide these steps of reconciliation. As President Obed said, it is just but the beginning, but it was recognized as important because conversation, being able for the Holy Father to listen to the stories of those who survived residential schools, to parents who have been seeing their young often affected through what we've come to know that this trauma affects other generations. The youth delegate was very, very moved, and she spoke with great respect, but also recognized that she was representing many of the young people from the north. When we did enter, and as Archbishop Gagnon mentioned, the Holy Father did greet each person. And he does that in a way that I think allows people to feel that he's welcoming in them. Yes, in a library that is somewhat, in many ways, extraordinary. We wouldn't see it every day in our lives, but it was very warm and engaging. But the first delegate who lit the kulak, and that this flame was marking the beginning of this important encounter. And we were told, and the Holy Father understood, that this is an important symbol for the Inuit people when they gather. And so to have that expression, I think, was very important. Caused a bit of concern among some of the Vatican officials as to what was going to happen, but once Rhoda sort of explained how this would unfold and explained it very well, the flame kept lit during the whole meeting. It was a sense of warmth, as what was said, Light is very important, as we've come to know in the Arctic. It's a sign of life. And I think that that was symbolic of what was going to take place. Life for many people who have gone to residential schools has not been easy. They've been victims of both physical and sexual abuse. And these stories were told. And they were told with respect, but with a sense of knowing that the Holy Father needed to hear this. And he was gracious. He listened with intent and recognized, as we all have, that this is a travesty that has affected the church and affected our First Nations, our Métis and Inuit. I also want to say that there was a great sense of wanting the future of our children, as has been expressed, to be recognized in this path of reconciliation. We're not just doing this for now, we're doing it for generations to come. And this message kept coming through in the delegates, and especially the parents who were present. This delegation is something that I think the Holy Father wanted to happen. As we know, it was delayed in December, and so his desire to have this delegation return, I think, is a sign that we need to begin this process of reconciliation. The fact that the delegates rose and prayed in Inuktitut, the Our Father, you could see a sense in his own expression and being present in that moment of prayer, that he felt at home, even though the language was something that was familiar to those who were part of the delegation. There was a sense of peace and calmness that came over the encounter as we began. I just maybe want to also express that the messages that President Obed has continued to bring forward in our discussions and in the planning is a sense of his commitment for his people, but also I think the openness that you've shown at all times to want to work with the church and to also recognize, as was expressed, that the church and the churches are important collaborators, important friends, hopefully, in this journey of reconciliation. And finally, I just want to also acknowledge that Martha, who was there as a healthcare worker, someone there to support them, having gone through that pain and suffering, she had an ability to understand where these delegates were expressing to the Holy Father. And her summary, with all due respect, President Obed, was very much from the heart, recognized that this was an important moment, not only for her, but for the people that she represented. And so I thank you for those words that you expressed to the Holy Father. And as he said, if he comes to Canada, he sure doesn't want to come in the winter to the Arctic. But in some ways, he was jesting, because he does want to come, but he would like to come at a time when it's not as cold in Canada as it is in the winter. So he expressed that, and there was a lightheartedness at some times to the encounter as well, which made it very, very welcoming and friendly. So with that,
thanks all of you for those reflections. Let's see, any questions? We'll follow the same path as before. Thanks, Sarah, for the microphone. Please let us know which media organization you're representing and who you're directing your question to. Thank you.
Thank you for taking our questions. I'm Olivia Spanovich from CBC News. I have a question for the bishops. I'd like to know, do you support this call from the leader of the Inuit delegation to have Pope Francis personally intervene in the case of Father Johannes Rivoire to bring him to justice in Canada and to help extradite him? And what do you plan to do about that?
so I was present as President Obed made that request of the Holy Father. I think I would begin by saying that this particular situation, any situation of sexual abuse, the Church needs to take responsibility. And as we've heard, justice and truth are important in this path of reconciliation. So the truth that this individual, this priest, has committed these particular alleged acts of abuse and is now living in France, President Obed has asked that the church assist him and also the Canadian government to try and make sure that this act of justice can be realized in Canada. I do know that Bishop Krotke has also expressed his commitment on behalf of the church and as the bishop up in Churchill, Manitoba, to also assist President Obed. Personally, the Holy Father, I think, heard that this is important. We need to continue to state that the church needs to address this in a forthright manner. And I also know that the Oblates have also reached out to President Obed, and he will have an opportunity to be meeting with them this week, and we'll be discussing issues related to this particular case as well. So I think these are concrete ways that we can support the request that Archbishop, or as President Obed made to Pope Francis, is to assist in this act of justice.
Next question.
Madame, you guys, I'm Cree from northern Quebec, and I'm here to cover this historical event in my language for back home, and for our priests here. Maybe just the same question as the delegates. Is it only going to be that I don't know how to refer to them, priest who's going to be extradited, hopefully, or is it going to be all of the priests? Because we do have a case in Quebec too as well, and it was only 10 years ago. We find out that that priest is somewhere else, stationed somewhere else. You know, like they're just being moved around. So it's the same thing. We want justice too as well. So it's not. I don't want to take your story away, but you know, can we look at other cases too as well, and not just this one particular one? Again, no disrespect to you. You guys.
Perhaps I'll start by saying that the intervention that we made was for the Catholic Church to work with us in a global sense, in a larger sense, wherever there are accusations of sexual abuse or physical abuse, that the perpetrators be brought to Canada to face those charges. And this particular case is one that we have been trying to work on for decades, which is why we highlighted this particular case. But in no way did I intend, or ITK intend, to make it about one particular case when we know that there are other scenarios. The same principles apply to all that we are applying to this particular case. So that answers part of the question.
No, I would follow up and agree with President Obed. This is just not one isolated case. And so I believe what I'm stating is that the Church wants to work with the relevant justice authorities, whether they be international or Canadian. And if there are allegations that someone has committed these abuse, that they need to be brought to justice, and the Church should not stand in the way, but assist those who have been victims to seek justice and healing. And this is but one way that the Church can continue to do that. And we need to be aware more of these particular cases so that we can be an instrument. Not that we're standing in the way, but we need to be an instrument that is more effective in allowing these particular situations and individuals to be brought to justice.
Cindy Wooden from Catholic News Service. I saw in one of the interviews you did before coming that you acknowledged that not all the Inuit are supportive of this process or ready to engage in this process. Did you explain to the Pope, that how the reality in your community of, not everybody really thrilled yet with what this engagement with the church, and not really ready for that step yet? And my second question is just a curiosity. Was there any kind of exchange of gifts? Thank you.
The first question, I brought it up in my remarks in the full spectrum of the Inuit collective. There are many Inuit who are Catholics, who are practicing Catholics. Many people who have a strong faith, and that is a very positive influence in their communities. There are then also many who are still struggling to have any sort of relationship with the Catholic Church because of the trauma that they themselves have experienced or the trauma that their loved ones have experienced. We know through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we know through the Murdered Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, we know through the type of work that Martha has been doing at the community level. We hear these stories about where people are, and people are in such different places. So there is no one position that can be taken that will take into account all of the Inuit collective. But at the same time, we know that there are a number of people who have told their elected officials that these are the paths that we want to take, and then we bring these paths forward on behalf of Canadian Inuit. So we do our best, but we also recognize that there's complexity to this conversation and a complexity around faith. No matter if it's Catholic, no matter if it's Anglican or whatever faith it might be, and colonialism, and human rights abuses, that is unfortunately just a central tenet of the relationship that the Church has had with Indigenous peoples in Canada and with the Inuit specifically. We are here pushing back against that. And we hear the Church talking about wanting to be on that path with us, and so that is encouraging. In relation to gifts, yes, there were a number of gifts that were given by the delegation to the Pope. I do hope that there are some photos shared of the Pope wearing his new stole, I think it's called, that was made of sealskin presented to him today. There was also a rosary case made of sealskin. There were 2 carvings that were provided to the Pope, and then some personal messages that were delivered to him as well. So the Pope was very thankful for these gifts. He interacted with those people who had presented to him, and then each of the delegates received a gift on the way up from the Pope directly. So there was an exchange of gifts, and I think people were very thankful for not only the Pope's interest in what he received, but also his token of appreciation to the delegates.
Thank you. Just with
Good afternoon, I'm Matthew Lee with Radio Canada. My question is for Ms. Gregg. You've mentioned the importance of forgiveness on both sides and how it is critical to move on. What would you like, what do you need to hear from the Pope, whether here or in Canada, in order for him to deserve your forgiveness as a residential school survivor?
I was raised that it's very important to forgive whatever wrong has done to you. We always have to forgive them, though we won't forget. But not everybody is the same, and everybody is at different stages, and some of them are not at all ready to even want to hear forgiveness. But an apology to a lot of people, with my clients, have expressed that it would mean a lot. A genuine, heartfelt apology would be a first step to start wanting to start healing So that is something that I personally, as a former residential school student, that would mean a lot to me myself, but more so for my fellow former students. And a lot of them have now passed away. So, but it's also their children that are affected as well. So it would mean more so important to them to move on. Because as when we were taken to school, there's parenting skills that we lacked in a lot of things that we had forgotten, not forgotten, but the lifestyle had changed. And we are now into big communities, whereas when we were taken away to residential school, we were raised by our parents. We were taught to be out on the land, and then when we got to the school, we learned how to be white person, which we cannot be. We are Inuit, we are First Nation, we are Métis. So that is something that we have to learn to live with one another, and also us be given the right to live our way, the way we want to live our life, and to have to be in respect with each other. So that is something. It's not that. What I'm trying to say is, we have to work together on this. So an apology is the first step, then the forgiveness hopefully will follow through.
Thank you. Final word, President Obed, from you, if you would.
We really appreciate the opportunity, and we also appreciate that this story is being covered globally. This is a time for actions, and we have put some very clear actions forward to the Catholic Church and to the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops, and we look forward to working in partnership with them to realize the actions that are necessary to bring reconciliation, to bring healing to communities, and to bring justice to those who have not had justice yet. We recognize that this is not just years in the making for this particular meeting, but this is an ongoing relationship between a global power in this particular place and 51 small communities in Inuit, 65,000 Inuit in Canada. And we often, as Inuit, have felt powerless over time to sometimes correct the wrongs that have been done to us. We're incredibly resilient, and we are great at forgiving, as Martha has talked about. But we are still in search of the lasting respect and the right to self-determination and the acknowledgement of that right by institutions that have harmed us. And this is where we are in this moment, and we look forward to this new path. And we'll hold people accountable to the path that we say that we have a shared mission to walk together on.
Well, as President Obed said, we do need to find the way to walk together. And I think one of the most important things, as he's mentioned, is the respect and the acknowledgement of the identity of our Indigenous communities. And the fact that sometimes we realize that forces and powers and certain ways in which maybe aspects of colonialization have taken culture, family, and that has been affected for generations. And this truth is coming out, maybe in ways that some of us are still trying to understand, but by dialoguing and listening, as President Obed had said, I think we're better able to understand the truth, and from that truth, the path of reconciliation, and as Martha said, hopefully healing and forgiveness. But we have to begin those steps in order to have people realize that this is something that God wants, a real sense of forgiveness and reconciliation. So I thank President Obed and also Martha for being present. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers, President Obed, Martha Gregg, Archbishop Daniel, and Bishop McGrattan. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, for sharing your time with us. Thank you to all of you who joined us. I know that many of you still have requests or interest in speaking to either President Obed, individual delegates, or some of the bishops. And I know that there's contact information that we shared with media to be able to try to facilitate that as best we can. Patricia D'Souza is here in the front row, who's the communications representative from the ITK, and we'd be happy to work with any of you that would like to chat further. Thank you again for being here. Our next briefing will be on Thursday at 3 p.m., where we will have representatives from the First Nations delegation sharing their experiences from their meeting, which is Thursday morning. Friday, we will have a briefing at 3:30 p.m. with representatives from all the delegations, and that's following the meeting that takes place with the Holy Father, the public audience, on Friday at noon our own time. Thank you again for being with us. Have a wonderful day.
Casa stampa, e poi c'è la salute a una partita davanti. E alle fine le domande sì, poi dicevo. No, che la casa è certo, sì, sì. Vogliamo poi prima del bambino iniziale, un po' di manine. Dai dai. Ospita.